You're listening to Birds on Power Lines. If you've been following our podcasts, you know we're fans of Neil Gaiman's work, and Good Omens is no exception. If you're also a fan, you'll know what I mean when I say that we think we recovered enough from the final 15 to be able to podcast about the show. So, in this episode, we're starting a series of podcasts where we take a deep dive into the Amazon series and share our thoughts on each episode. In this podcast, we talk about the first 3 installments: In the Beginning, the book, and Hard Times. We hope you enjoy the conversation. It's nice to go back and study these episodes again for Good Omens, and I figure we'll probably have enough time to do it again still before season 3 comes out. Because there's again so much there that you can get a lot on the reviewing that you didn't catch before. And, you know, for me, like most things involving Neil Gaiman, my first exposure always seems to be seeing something on the screen first when it comes to these. So I, of course, saw season 1 before reading it. And I didn't actually, I listened to it on audio. And then I saw season 2. So I was pretty impressed upon listening to the book how much the series was like the book. And I think that's one of the reasons it was so popular amongst fans that had been in love with this book for a long time. And then now, because we're going back and revisiting it, I'm kind of looking back at the story. I knew it had something to do with Terry Pratchett wanting Gaiman to do this. And I was like, well, you know, they're good friends. So I was trying to, you know, look back and find out exactly what happened. So I mean, this is obviously common knowledge among people who know, but I thought it was pretty funny to learn that Neil Gaiman had actually said there was no way, no how that he was going to do this without Terry. And then after Terry Pratchett passing away, then him getting a letter somehow sent after he had passed, asking or telling Neil that he's got to put this together and make it into either a movie or a series. I don't know if he was, if he had specified, I don't know, but you know, it's just so funny because he essentially gets the last laugh, sending a letter after his death. So yeah. So episode 1, In the Beginning, you know, just watching this again, I really can't imagine any 2 other actors pulling this off. I really can't. There's just so much nuance to everything here, and even upon reading it or listening to it read, you know, it's you know, it has a certain rhythm to it, and these 2 are just the right pair to do it, and you know, and then but now reflecting back on it, I'm reacting to certain things in this first episode identically to how I did upon the first viewing. And I always felt bad about how Aziraphale was always reminding Crowley at the beginning that he was a demon. And I always felt like, you know, Aziraphale was always giving this sort of air that he was superior because, you know, he's an angel and heaven is always right. And you know, I know that, you know, now where you've seen the whole thing, I know that there's more nuance to that, right? But, you know, me being a novice to it and my very first exposure to Good Omens being that first episode, I just thought it was curious that I'm reacting exactly the same way, feeling, you know, bad. You know, so it's just like, so I you know, there is something there. Like I really do, you know, I really did feel bad for Crowley, and you know, how that was going. But now after seeing both seasons, you know, the first episode, there's so many of the iconic lines in there. You know, that whole thing with Crowley saying eternity, you know, that's there. And, you know, what if we both got it wrong, you know, and then the other one, get thee behind me, foul fiend, and then after you. I mean, that's all in the first episode, which I wasn't really thinking about. So those are all like these iconic lines, and there's more, but those are the 3 that I love. And then in terms of, which scenes do I like best, they're still the same as my first viewing. My absolute love, or I adore the scene with the both of them on the garden wall, and when it starts raining, and how Aziraphale protects Crowley. And then the other thing that I'm struck by now, actually having seen both seasons, is that I'm really struck by how in the beginning Crowley is always trying to get Aziraphale's approval or trying to convince him. But to me, the way I feel about it, and we'll see if I still feel this way when we review season 2, but I feel it's the opposite in season 2. So, and I do know in the last episode of season 1, Aziraphale's expecting Crowley to fix things, and so I mean, there's a lot more nuance, but I am. It's like I said, I'm curious how I'm reacting to this first episode in exactly the same way as I did the first time I saw it. Oh yeah, and then the other thing is the other thing I really loved was Crowley as the nanny. And I'm still creeped out by Aziraphale as the gardener. I still think he's creepy, but I think it's so funny when he tries to do that magic act, and Crowley's reaction at that birthday party, just standing there going, "Oh my God," it's great. So I'm really enjoying watching this season again. And I'm curious to see if I keep reacting the same for every episode as I did on the first viewing. But it just watching this first viewing of the first episode, the second, or maybe second, or even partially third viewing of this first episode, I'm curious by how that I'm still reacting the same way to the same things. So that hasn't changed, and I wonder if you reacted the same way. But you were more familiar with the story, obviously, than I was when I first saw this. So, but yeah, so again, I'm really enjoying watching this again.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm really struck by, because I actually listened to the audiobook first, and then I read the book, and then I watched the show. So I'm always very struck by the faithfulness of the adaptation. It's a very good book to TV, I guess, adaptation. I guess it would be about the same league as the Lord of the Rings films. The extended versions are very, very quite faithful to the original books. And I mean, I guess Harry Potter, to a certain extent, they did cut a few things out, but I really do think that especially this Good Omens specifically is a very good book to TV adaptation. I felt the same way about Sandman too. We didn't watch American Gods. I haven't seen American Gods, but I've heard out of all of Neil Gaiman's books, that one is not a hugely faithful adaptation. I'm not sure, but I've never seen it. But yeah, so it's interesting that there are very select ones that are adapted well, and of course it's not just Neil's book, but anyway, yeah, I am very struck by the faithfulness of the adaptation as well. But yeah, I mean, one thing that I feel the show adds an extra dimension to the book, because I know we quote the book or we quote the show at each other all the time. It's actually very funny, but yeah, I feel the show itself, because it's so faithful, it does bring another almost deeper dimension to the original source material. And I feel season 2 definitely it has expanded on season 1 / the book. I think Neil was saying that it wasn't he and Terry Pratchett had originally started writing the second, or they had some ideas for the second for a second installment, but they never really intended to do very much with it. So I'm kind of wondering how close that is to what they were kind of intending to do, or if it had to be completely scrapped and redone for the screen, or for I guess more modern times, I guess. So that would be an interesting thing to look into. But actually, and you mentioned their dynamic as well, Aziraphale and Crowley's dynamic about one expecting the other to fix things and trying to look for approval in the other one and such. I honestly didn't really notice that. I just didn't really think about that. To me, I feel the characters are just there, and it's I feel they both have a give and take relationship almost like equally. And I feel like that's another reason why people seem to love their dynamics so much, because like, yes, they are like technically like divine beings, but they also are just really normal people. They're normal people in a relationship. They get into fights, they do great things together, and we're just kind of along for the ride. But actually, going back to my, like, what I originally said about, like, the show giving the book, like, a whole new like, level of, a whole new layer, this is one of the select few shows that I just love the soundtrack for. Like, there's only a handful of shows and or movies that I can say that for, and this is one of them. And it's really interesting because the composer David Arnold actually hasn't really done too much. Like, he hasn't actually done really very much else that we've seen, or really that much in general, which is a little bit odd because he is a very good composer, in my opinion. Two things that you might recognize: he did the original Stargate film, the 1994 version, the one that kicked off everything, and I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he did the original Stargate film, not the show, he did the original Stargate film, and he also did Sherlock, which I know probably a lot of people who were in that fandom, like when it was going on, are probably now in the Good Omens fandom, or in both. But yeah, so he did both of those pieces of media, but other than that, he hasn't done like a great deal else. Like, he mostly did a lot of stuff in the early 2000s and into like a bit the early 2010s, and then he just like kind of stopped until the 2020s. Like, he did a few things, but it really, like, in terms of how much, like, you see like a lot of composers do in a year, he's taken on very few projects. And it's actually very interesting to like look at his discography on Wikipedia, which is what I'm looking at right now. But it's just very interesting to see the things that he's picking and things that he's choosing to do. He very much seems to like Benedict Cumberbatch for whatever reason. But yeah, it's just very, very interesting. But I do quite enjoy the soundtrack for Good Omens. So that's another layer that I also really enjoy, that I feel like the show brings to the book.
I was thinking about what you were saying about the adaptations. And, reflecting on what you said about American Gods, and I know we haven't watched it. We've both read American Gods, or I listened to it, of course. But, the one thing that is worth remembering is what sort of what I've read about in terms of Neil's approach, and that he sees that the written work and the video version of the work are separate pieces of art. So I would guess that is sort of the flavor that one needs to take from that. And I mean, there's just so much going on in American Gods, and yeah, so I can imagine, but yeah, I mean, that is what one can read, that the American Gods isn't as close or true to the written work as other things. Certainly as Good Omens, season 1 seems to be very close to the written work. But that's the interesting thing about season 2, like you were saying, because there isn't really anything for us to read about that and compare to. But I do believe that Neil is very faithful to Terry, so much so, as I was saying before, that he wasn't even going to continue without Terry. So I would hazard to guess that a lot of what we're seeing in season 2 is really what him and Terry were hashing out and talking about as they were working on definitely the book, right? So they're probably talking about their characters, and I mean, I'm not an author, but I can imagine what friends would be talking about, especially author friends, on something that they worked very, very well, obviously, together on, and really enjoyed doing together. And then about how Aziraphale and Crowley are just normal. And I mean, they're not, and they are, right? And I think that's why we can relate to them so well, because we can really see ourselves in them somehow. Or at least we can relate to, how they feel about things. And I think that's, and that they're just very sort of believable characters. And I think that's probably why they really hit the mark with the fans and with most people, and definitely why the book is so popular. And then I was curious because I'm not the music nerd, but I did look up David Arnold and to see what he's done, and I guess it's not that he hasn't done a lot, it's just that he doesn't. There's some not as a lot recently, I guess, comparatively to other people that we've run across. But the big thing that came out when I was looking at his discography or whatever you call that, is that he did Narnia, right? Narnia. And Gaiman is a huge fan of Narnia. And I mean, I'm just reading The View from the Cheap Seats right now, so I know this. So there's that connection. So I don't know if that sort of framed, his desire to work with David Arnold on this. And then, of course, like big things that he did that I would be familiar with would be a lot of the James Bond themes, right? So again, that was a while ago, but definitely things that certainly someone of my generation would be very familiar with. So now really thinking about this second episode, and it's hard for me because somehow all of these scenes all sort of blend in together, and I don't know why that is. So I really had to, look at the Good Omens wiki to make sure that I was really focused on the second episode, which is called The Book. And I really started to enjoy this, looking back on it, is because you really start to see these dynamics between Aziraphale and Crowley, which of course build and develop, but you sort of see their contrasts, right? And you kind of see, how they sort of tell each other things and not tell each other things, which is really kind of weird in this episode. And in particular, I was always sort of intrigued by how Aziraphale doesn't really let on about the book, even when Crowley gives him a call. So I always found that a little odd, and he just sort of keeps it to himself. Like, Crowley calls and he's like, "Oh yeah, things are fine," and hangs up. "I'm busy," kind of thing, right? Meanwhile, it's like, you just kind of figured out where the Antichrist is. But that said, I love that whole scene where he's, piecing it all together and realizing how these prophecies are so spot on, right? From like, getting the dog to stand on his hind legs. Like, I just thought that was just so funny. And I think Michael Sheen just does that bit so well. It's just so funny. And then the other scene that I just love, and I think this is very popular, but when they go to where the convent was, or the hospital, which is now at Tadfield Manor or something like that, and the people are playing out their work kind of retreat and ending up having like a war with each other, while heaven and hell are preparing for war. Like I just and then that whole thing about Crowley making the bullets real and that no one's gonna get hurt. Like it's just perfect. Like I can't even think of anything that I would do to that to make it better. It's just awesome. And then the other part that I think is kind of funny, it was when Gabriel and I think there's Sandalphon. I can never get these other angel names right, but when the two of them show up at the bookshop and think that they're fooling the dumb humans when they're talking about the pornography. I mean, just so pathetic and so funny. I mean, that could really, if it wasn't in the right hands, that wouldn't be funny, but it was funny. And then the other part that I love, of course, that whole thing with Agnes Nutter. I just like, she's that character is awesome. I wish that we would be able to see more of her, but it's so good. When they come and get her, says, "You're late," just not at all like worried about anything. Just like, this is what's supposed to happen. And oh my God, I just love that. And then the weird things that happen with Athema and, how she's with them and literally with the Antichrist and doesn't know that it's him. And that goes back to Crowley saying that suspicion just slides off of him. And then that whole comedy between Newton and Shadwell, oh my God, it's just so funny. One thing that I could never quite figure out, and it's like Aziraphale feeling that love when they get to Tadfield, right? So I'm wondering, is that because that's how they sort of hide the Antichrist, or I was never quite clear on that. So I don't know if you have any ideas on that, but that was something that wasn't quite clear. But clearly something that he could sense and Crowley could not. So that's why I feel it has something to do with hiding the Antichrist. And that way you just wouldn't sense him because you would be thinking the opposite. So I think that's probably where that's going. But I was still a little foggy on that. And it was always sort of something in the back of my mind, like, why can he sense this? And I guess because Crowley's a demon, but you wouldn't need to hide the Antichrist from, anyways. I'm probably overthinking it, but usually, everything with Good Omens has, really ties in together. Like, even as they go through all of Agnes Nutter's prophecies and how at the beginning they sound just bizarre, and then, how she's writing that one literally when they're coming to get her, and you find that out later on. I can't remember which episode, but when they deliver, when they deliver stuff to, to the house later on at the, that is just brilliant. But yeah, so everything ties in together. So this is the one little thing that I feel is a little bit loose to me. But I'm guessing that's probably what it was. And I just didn't catch on right away. But yeah, again, this is, this episode is so much fun because you're bringing in all these characters that you're now going to play with for the next the next part of the whole series. So it's just like, yeah, anyways. So that's my feeling on episode 2.
I actually did not know that Neil Gaiman was a Narnia fan, but honestly, that kind of makes sense. Because most people who are into, like, fantasy and stuff do, like, or at least have heard of Narnia. I know that was, like, a thing that I read quite a bit growing up. But, yeah, I think, like, your point that, like, the characters are just, like, very likable, and that's why I think this fandom is just so, like, large and diverse and appeals to so many people, because just the characters themselves are just, like, relatable and likable. Like, you can see yourself in these characters, even though, like, maybe you might not do exactly what they're doing, because, like, they do have very strict, like, morals and rules and things and, like, ways they act, but, like, you can almost see yourself in, like, almost any character. Like, you can see, like, an aspect of yourself in these characters, and I think it's really interesting that, like, Neil and Terry put this, like, tiny sliver of humanity into every single character, human or not. And it's just, like, it's really interesting how they were able to do that. But yeah, I think, like, overall with this, moving on to the second episode, I also think it was a good introductory episode of all of the people who are going to be main characters throughout the season. And, like, I think it's interesting, like you said, that Aziraphale doesn't tell Crowley what's going on with, like, Agnes Nutter's book, or, like most things, like, this entire season, like, I think mostly, like, looking ahead, I think, like, the reason why these two fought quite a bit towards the end of the season was because they weren't really willing to, like, even though they were, like, they've worked together for such a long time, they're like very friendly friends with each other, but they kind of are still, like, and this goes for, like, these two characters throughout the course of this entire series. They really stick to their guns, and they do not, like, they think that their way of doing something is the way to do it, and even though they work well together, they also still have difficulty compromising, and this especially is, like, seen during this first season. Like, they have a bit of difficulty, I feel, compromising and doing things the other person's way. Like, they both think this is the way to do it, and this is my end goal, and we both have the same end goal, but we're going about it two kind of completely different ways, and we'll see. Like, we're basically throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. Hopefully one of us will be able to figure this stuff out, even though we're kind of working together, but kind of, not. It's a little interesting, but I think that both those characters are very stubborn, I guess, in a sense. And I think that's causes like quite a bit of consternation and conflict for both of them, especially later on in this episode, like starting with Aziraphale not telling Crowley about the book, really sort of sets the stage for almost like a snowball effect of them not telling the other one things, or them not being able to tell the other one things, and it just completely compounding into the big, like, climactic final battle and makeup at the end of the season. But yeah, and you mentioned the scene with Gabriel and Seracriel in the bookshop. I also thought that was very funny, and it's funny. Like, I feel like Johnhamm, Gabriel's actor, really does know how to like almost like over exaggerate the actions he's doing, over exaggerate like the like, I guess, almost stuffiness of the character of Gabriel, and like kind of like the jerk-ish, or like really just like the abrasive part of Gabriel. He really knows how to really emphasize that, but still not make it so abrasive that he's a dislikable character. I mean, yes, he definitely does do questionable things, and is of a questionable demeanor towards other people, especially people that he views as less than, since he's like the supreme archangel and stuff. But like, I think that really right now Johnhamm's acting of Gabriel in this season kind of sets up the basis for why Jim Briel is so well loved in season 2, and why like Gabriel was eventually able to get that happy ending. Well, for now at least. But yeah, I really I think that this scene in particular really emphasizes what, like, how Gabriel almost like at this point in time, he almost like looks down on people, on humans, on Aziraphale for interacting with humans, but like he like most of the other angelic and demonic characters also is very like, he just is very like stubborn, and he's like he goes on and on about like the war, and the divine plan is going according to plan. And it's just interesting, like, how at its heart this is kind of a show about bureaucracy, but it's also about the humanity of bureaucracy and how things get broken and made in performing bureaucracy. But actually that is another thing that I think lends itself, like, going back to the point I was making at the beginning, this is another thing that kind of lends itself to why this show is so well liked, because it is like it deals with like things that we, like, normal people have to deal with. We have to deal with like annoying bosses, or like deadlines, or things going disastrously wrong, and it's just but it's in the lens of like a semi-comedic parody of the Bible and stuff. And that's another thing that I think really lends itself to why the show is so well liked. But then also another thing you wanted to ask me was why this like love kind of masks Adam from being sensed by like pretty much anyone except for Aziraphale when he actually sets foot in Tadfield. I honestly did not really think about it in terms of like divine or demonic influence or like anything. I didn't really think very much of that, but I think instead of like, because like Aziraphale and Crowley were so set on like counteracting the divine and demonic influences, instead of these divine and demonic influences, it was just pure human influence, and the influence was love that Adam felt from his parents, from his friends, from his community. And I think that's kind of created like almost a bubble around Tadfield, where it like if things had gone according to plan, or if things had gone like according to either side's plan, there would have been a demonic aura or a divine aura around wherever the Antichrist was. But since neither of them really had that much effect on him, and it was just purely human, pure human influence, I think that's why that like bubble of love around Tadfield appeared that Aziraphale sensed. But overall, like, this second episode, I really liked how they kind of almost seamlessly blended the past with the present. Like, we saw, like, the backstories of Newt and Anathema's ancestors. And, like, I liked how they blended, like, hundreds of years in the past to the present. And that's, like, a recurring theme that happens throughout a lot of Good Omens episodes. Like, we see, like, Aziraphale and Crowley's backstory going back to the present. Like, we especially see that in like season 2 a lot more. But it's just interesting how how the showrunners are able to play with time in a sense. They're able to play with time, and they do it quite well without like really making it a huge thing. They're just like, here's some backstory and here's how this connects. And I think that's a very compelling thing that they do throughout these episodes. And I think that's really interesting.
So episode 3, wow, there's so much going on in this episode. I really didn't realize how much I missed on the first viewing. So this was essentially my second viewing. And since there's so much, I lost track of all the things that I missed from the first viewing that I noticed in the second viewing, that I actually went back and looked at it again. So I know that's cheating, but I did. So I think I'm going to sort of just go over the things that I missed that now I realized. And I mean, it all makes sense, but just to reiterate the things that I missed on the first viewing. And I think really the first time I was watching it, I was just sort of caught up in the growing relationship between Aziraphale and Crowley. So I wasn't really thinking about the content. And anyways, so seeing it again, one gets a better chance to really sort of think about what was happening. So I kind of missed at the beginning where Aziraphale kind of, I guess, essentially lied to God about the sword, or didn't really tell the complete truth, right? Or just sort of left out some information. So there is already that. So that sort of already shows you that Aziraphale and Crowley do have, because Aziraphale gave away the sword for a reason, right? And it kind of already shows that Aziraphale and Crowley are kind of, on the same wavelength to a certain degree, right? And then the other thing is that Crowley continues to be very critical of essentially God's choices, right? So killing the kids and drowning everybody and things happening that, with each scenario. So that sort of is a through line, and I guess I noticed it more seeing it again. But then with the crucifixion scene, I didn't catch the first time around that Crowley was the one that showed the kingdoms of the world to Jesus. And I just thought that was pretty funny because he was really trying to show him opportunities for really, for a handy, carpenter. So I just thought that was pretty funny. And then with the play with Shakespeare, I know I noticed this the first time, but now that I've been following things a little bit more about Michael Sheen and David Tennant, so I know that they've both played Hamlet. So I just thought that was interesting that they're both, watching Hamlet and Shakespeare trying to develop Hamlet. And in that, Crowley sort of inspires Shakespeare with his line, and then he's the one that actually does the miracle to make Hamlet a popular play. I just think that's funny. I think I probably noticed that the first time around, but it was funnier now for some reason. I don't know why. But anyways, I just think it's really interesting. And then with France in the Bastille, I missed the fact that Jean-Claude actually ends up getting sent to the guillotine. I don't know why I missed that the first time, but yeah. So that was pretty funny. And I also thought it was like in that Crowley sort of took credit for the revolution, even though he didn't actually do anything because the humans thought of it on their own. So I kind of missed that the first time around. And I also kind of missed, this should have been obvious, but that the Nazis were trying to get Agnes Nutter's book. I mean, seriously, why did I miss that the first time? So I'm like, oh, they're looking for that book. I don't know why. I guess because, watching this series, I just see it as Good Omens, and the if you read the book, then the title of Agnes Nutter and the prophecies would be more to mind. But in this case, since I just know it as Good Omens, I guess the first viewing, it just was lost on me because I wasn't familiar with everything that was going on. And then there's the whole thing with Aziraphale and Crowley and the holy water. And you kind of see already that Aziraphale is concerned about Crowley, is afraid that Crowley wants to use the holy water as to commit suicide. So there was that, but then I missed the fact that in Soho he was trying to set up the stealing of the holy water. So I missed that. Okay, I guess because I don't know why I missed that. I just thought he was trying to make some deal, and I didn't really pay attention that it was the holy water. And then with that, of course, I missed that Shadwell, I guess Shadwell Senior, I don't know, but he was trying to make a deal with Crowley, to set up funds and sort of make the Witchfinder army, at his disposal when he needs it. And so that sort of made me think now, how did he set up Aziraphale? Or at what point was Aziraphale set up with the Witchfinder army? Because obviously in this episode, you see them both sending Shadwell, the current Shadwell, to go and look for, he doesn't know this, the Antichrist, but the boy. So I just think it's funny how that he was playing both sides, and I guess that part of it was, I mean, I realized it, but it kind of got lost on me, like the significance of that at the beginning. And then the other thing about Adam's aura being so big that she couldn't see it. And that sort of now comes back to the other thing that I was wondering about, was with this, the feeling of love. And I guess that's because of the aura, right? So I guess that all makes sense now. But yeah, so this episode was a lot of fun, and it was really worth going back and seeing this again, because now it really puts all those little pieces together. And I think probably because the first time I watched Good Omens, I hadn't read the book yet, and so a lot of that was lost on me because it actually goes pretty quick, and sometimes it's kind of hard to hear. So some little details get dropped. So I really think that this episode is important because of all the setup that happens in it. And not that I didn't follow the rest of the series, obviously I did, but somehow this makes it really solidifies it. It makes a lot more meaningful, and just the whole interactions and all the little things that are going on. I just think it's so brilliant. But yeah, so I really enjoyed seeing this again. And of course, like I said, I watched it a third time, or most of it a third time. So to make sure that I was really solid on the things that I had missed. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I'm so glad that we're watching all of these episodes again.
Even though this episode is like basically just as long as all of the other episodes in both seasons, it felt a lot longer than all of the other ones, just because I agree there was so much in this episode, and it's just like literally like the first half of it was all in the past, and then the back half is in the present time. But it's just because there was so much like exposition and backstory about like Aziraphale and Crowley's relationship and throughout the ages, and I mean we get even more of that in season 2, but this episode 3 is actually like one of the first like episodes where we get to see how the two have interacted and how they we saw how they met, but it just fleshes out their relationship a bit more. But actually, like, maybe because I read the book before watching the show, I did, like, catch quite a few of the little, like, references and, Easter, well, I guess Easter eggs kind of Easter eggs that, were in this episode. So, because I knew what we were getting into. Um, and, like, yeah, so, like you said, like, Aziraphale giving Crowley the holy water, and, like, and what the holy water was for, and even, like in the church during World War II, like I saw, like, I noticed Crowley was like eyeing the big vat of holy water, and Aziraphale was like, "Don't do that." And so, but yeah, I mean, and actually talking a little bit more about that, like that was kind of one of the interactions that I saw in this episode that I really liked the most, and I know we get to see it again in season 2, but I'm very glad for that. But like I really liked that quite a bit because like I feel like that's when they sort of started getting a lot closer and like trusting each other a bit more. And like now we know, like in season 2 we see why that was, but just with this church scene alone, like Crowley walked into the church even though it clearly did hurt him quite a bit for Aziraphale, like in order to kind of get him out of a very sticky situation. But I just think that situation in particular was very sweet of Crowley to do, and yeah, it started. We see them working together more and more, and that whole situation during the 1940s was kind of the pinnacle of that, in a sense. But like speaking of other dynamics that I liked in this episode, I really do. I think the dynamic between Newt and Shadwell is very funny. Like it's almost like Shadwell's his crazy uncle or something. And you were saying like, oh, you think that the Shadwell that Crowley met in the 19. I'm gonna date myself here. I'm gonna say the 1960s, 50s, I don't know. I think that I'm pretty sure that was young Shadwell, not Shadwell Senior. I think that was just Shadwell when he was younger. But I just really like the dynamic that those two have, because like Shadwell's just completely in with all of the like occult things, and he's a witch hunter. That's literally his job, and Newt's just like, sure, I'll go with that. I don't have anything better to do on my Saturdays. So I just think it's just really sweet, like both of those two dynamics in different ways. But I think it's very interesting that like Crowley and Aziraphale are just like we just see them scattered throughout history at very important events in like the Bible or just history in general. And that's part of the reason why I watch everything I watch with subtitles as long as I can get it, but this particularly, I like the subtitles being on for this show, so, because there's so much going on, and I don't want to miss anything, because usually, like, when I'm watching this, I'm looking at, like, what's, like, in the background, or, like, the little expressions and stuff on people's faces, and mostly I'm listening to the music. I'm not actually listening to the actual dialogue, so it's very good to have the subtitles, so I don't have to, like, rewind every 5 seconds and be like, what did they say? So, that helps me get a better sense of what's going on. And then another funny thing that I kind of noticed, especially now that we're seeing, like, we saw a whole bunch of time skips in this episode, is that, like, Aziraphale, like, no matter where or when he is, he's always wearing such, like, fancy clothes. He seems, like, very over the top, but, like, both of them are kind of a bit, like, just their mannerisms are very funny and also contradictory at the same time in different ways. So Aziraphale always dresses like he dresses fancily. He's very well put together, but he is he plays like very like innocent, unassuming, very pure, like an angel. But like he is like quite often willing to just like bend the rules a little bit, even though he doesn't want to admit that, and he, like, if he really thinks about it, he gets, like, almost an aneurysm trying to think about doing something wrong. Like, it took a lot of convincing for Crowley and him to agree to do, like, miracles and temptations for each other, but especially on the part of Aziraphale, it took a lot of convincing for him to do that. But at the same time, like, Crowley also does usually look well put together, but he kind of like is he like always leaves like a little bit kind of not awkwardness, but like a little bit undone, just to kind of like drive home the point that like he is a demon, but he always also is pretty put together. He's always wearing very like, you know, fancy, not fancy, but he's wearing very stylish clothes, whereas on the other hand, Aziraphale's wearing very fancy clothes, which got him in trouble during the French Revolution. But then on the other hand, Crowley, he always exudes like confidence and like nonchalance. He's being cool without even trying. But like he really does, and I think we see this more in season 2, but like he does really get in his head quite a bit. And he isn't like that cool, confident, stylish guy that he's always trying to portray. He really does care quite a bit. And like we see this more toward the end of the season, when the big confrontation and stuff. But I think we're kind of starting to see that a bit more now, especially when the two of them are arguing. It's usually because Crowley is kind of just worried about everything. Like he's always just got this low grade anxiety, almost, because he wants the holy water for insurance purposes, and he's always trying to plan ahead, even though he makes it seem like everything he does is just completely effortless. But yeah, I like, and things I'm noticing a lot, like all of the characters in general are kind of almost funny contradictions of themselves. Like, I mean, for example, Adam is the Antichrist, but he's just like a normal, kind person, for most of the time. But right now, especially, when we see him interacting with Anathema, like he really just genuinely is just very curious about the world, and like he just wants to make things better. And that's not what you would expect the Antichrist to do. But it's just very, very interesting how like the relationships between different characters and their interactions with other characters, so Newt and Shadwell and Aziraphale and Crowley, and I guess kind of Adam and Anathema that we're seeing right now, really bring out the fact that all of these characters are just very multidimensional, and it's just so nice. It's so nice that they're all thought out very well, and they're complicated, and that's just, I mean, there's only 6 episodes per season, and we basically got 12 episodes, 12 hours with all of these characters, or less, depending on if they're in the second season or not, but like they're just fleshed out so very well, and it's just amazing how, you know, we're 3 episodes in, and we already are seeing that these characters are just very, very deep and relatable in multiple ways. And it's just amazing how the showrunners, the writers, the creators, everyone, the actors even, especially, the actors really drive it home, are able to just do this with what little we're able to see of them. They're able to make them these, like, living, breathing beings that are coming off the page, coming off the screen, and living rent-free in a lot of people's heads, and I think that's really cool.
This concludes our podcast on the first 3 episodes of Season 1 of Good Omens. We plan to continue our discussion of the Amazon series by reviewing each installment from both seasons, so please look forward to those podcasts. As always, thank you for listening and being part of the Birds on Power Lines podcast.